The following is a brief biography of Guru Padmasambhava. Let's continue with our teaching today. In the end, they arrived at the Oetsel Park of the Red Rock Palace. Note that this wasn't the Patala Palace, but rather Hepori near Samye. It seems that the terms and names used back then were a bit different. The messengers told Guru Padmasambhava that when he met the Tibetan King Trisong Detsen, he should prostrate to him, but Guru Rinpoche replied, "The king cannot withstand my prostrations." With that, he performed a prostration toward a massive rock instead, and it cracked right open. Then he prostrated toward the king's clothes, and they immediately caught fire. Seeing this, the king immediately prostrated at Guru Rinpoche's feet. It seems that when Khenpo Bodhisattva arrived in Tibet earlier, he had prostrated to the king. So at the very beginning, the king also expected that Guru Padmasambhava would prostrate to him. The detailed account of this experience can be found in the extensive biography of Padmasambhava. Guru Padmasambhava and Trisong Detsen first met somewhere near Samye Hepori, which is actually about over 10 kilometers away. Today there are 5 stone stupas there. It is a sacred site for pilgrimage. That is exactly where they first met, and that's how it all happened. Before that, Lady Chamzang of Drachma had built a temple in the style of Gudizian of the Han region. This Gudizian is likely a reference to Mount Wutai. This might be another temple near Samye. As for the main Samye Monastery itself, the first floor was in Tibetan style, built with stones. The second floor was built in Chinese style because of the close ties with the Tang dynasty at that time. The third floor followed the Indian style to symbolize the origin of Buddhism. This is why Samye is known as the 3-storied palace of unchanging spontaneous presence. I believe everyone is familiar with this. However, when Guru Padmasambhava first arrived there, this specific temple in the style of Gudizian had already been built. Although it was completed, it hadn't been consecrated yet, so they invited Guru Rinpoche to stay there. When Guru Padmasambhava arrived for the consecration, the king and his ministers had not yet appeared. All the guards from both inside and outside the palace came to watch, and they could hardly believe their eyes. Guru Padmasambhava conversed with all these statues, just like real people interacting with one another. He even invited those large statues right into the feast hosted by the king and himself. Many of the onlookers there might have had some doubts at that time. So at midnight they returned with lamps to inspect the shrine and found that the temple where the statue stood was completely empty. Not a single clay statue could be found. Still unable to believe it, they began searching with sticks, but they still found no trace of them. Only then were they truly convinced. Actually, you can read more about this yourselves later. I do not have enough time to go through the Testament of Ba, one of the oldest historical accounts in the Tibetan region, but in it, the entire process of building Samye Monastery is explained very clearly. The author, Ba Selnang, was actually a minister. The entire process of inviting Guru Padmasambhava, as well as inviting Khenpo Bodhisattva, including the construction of Samye Monastery, and all the interactions between King Trisong Detsen and Guru Padmasambhava are all recorded in detail within the Testament of Ba. As we discussed last time, there are 3 different versions of the Testament of Ba, including some supplemental additions that vary from one another. The accounts in the Testament of Ba are very clear, so many subsequent works, such as A Feast for the Wise, the Red Annals, and the Blue Annals, which are famous historical records of the Tibetan region, fundamentally rely on the Testament of Ba as the primary historical reference for the events surrounding Samye Monastery. When Guru Rinpoche came, King Trisong Detsen was already constructing Samye Monastery. According to some historical texts, during their first meeting, Guru Rinpoche held the layout of Samye in his palm, just like what we would call a rendering, to show the king. The king found it absolutely incredible and exclaimed, "Oh, Samye, Samye," which means inconceivable, and that is exactly how Samye Monastery got its name in the first place. So the name Samye implies something beyond expectation and truly inconceivable. It is really best to look into the entire construction process of Samye back then when you have time. It is very important. Why was Samye Monastery built first? In fact, when Guru Padmasambhava arrived from Nepal, the indigenous religion of the Tibetan region still held a great deal of influence. Moreover, among the Tibetan people, some had faith in the Dharma, while others did not. Under such circumstances, there was an urgent need for a monastery to propagate the Dharma. Looking back at the history of the temple's construction, as we can see from history, things were incredibly complicated. Even Guru Rinpoche was forced out by them. According to the records in this biography, the history of that period was quite complicated. Actually, looking at the historical record, Jonang Taranatha, the author of this brief biography, never actually set foot in India. Yet, incredibly, he wrote the history of Buddhism in India. At that time, many Indian scholars came to the Tibetan region. So, through his conversations with these scholars, he compiled the history of Buddhism in India based on their oral accounts and the questions he asked them. That is one version of the story. However, some people say that he did indeed travel to India, spending several years by the banks of the Ganges. There are such accounts as well, but accounts vary on this. He seemed to be around 36 years old when he started writing the history of Buddhism in India. Sometimes it is necessary for us to look into this history. We should know who Guru Padmasambhava truly is. Yesterday, I asked you to read the book In Search of Padmasambhava. There's also a documentary. The team had originally planned for an official screening in cinemas in Beijing, but they were suddenly prohibited from showing it. The production team faced certain challenges. We usually do not talk about such matters in class, but I really admire their spirit in propagating the life stories of Guru Rinpoche. Perhaps they have other considerations, including commercial interests. Yet sometimes we also need to utilize commercial means to propagate the Dharma. For biographies of Guru Padmasambhava and the profound principles within, if there were no commercial involvement and everything was just free, it might not necessarily reach a wider audience. In any case, I feel that as long as it is to promote Guru Rinpoche's teaching, we should offer our support. Then, at dawn that day, the people peered through the cracks of the door once more. They saw with their own eyes that all the statues were back to normal. Guru Padmasambhava was making offerings, and all the statues were actually enjoying the divine food. He also had face-to-face communication with them. These statues were likely made of clay back then, not bronze. On that day, all the lamps and incense lit up on their own. All the musical instruments started playing by themselves, and all the great bells rang out without being struck. Furthermore, the 5 prayer flags originally hung there multiplied into 500. Initially, there was only one plate containing about a handful of grapes, but no matter how many people ate from it, the grapes never ran out. Everyone there found it incredibly wondrous. Actually, there are many detailed accounts of the consecration that Guru Padmasambhava performed for the temple in that morning. He asked the royal god, Lalung Tsoche Nyanlek, to perform a divination using the mirror divination ritual of the goddess Marachi. As a result, what did he reveal? He disclosed the names of the malicious gods and demons of the Tibetan region. The one who sent the floods to Bangtang was the mountain god of Shampo. The one who struck the Lashari mountain with lightning was the mountain deity of Tangla, whom we mentioned yesterday. The ones causing diseases among people and livestock were the 12 Tenma goddesses, and the frost and hail were sent by the 9 malevolent spirits. Starting from that morning, many children from noble families also performed divinations through the mirror divination of the 4 heavenly kings. The fire spirit Yaksha manifested in person and revealed the names and dwellings of all the fierce spirits and nagas. In fact, such mirror divinations are mentioned in these records. Some might still exist today. But let's continue with the teaching. Then, in order to inspire unwavering faith in the king and his ministers, Guru Padmasambhava summoned those fierce spirits and demons and caused them to directly possess human mediums. This is very similar to the spirit mediumship we see today. Through intimidation, coercion, and proclaiming the Dharma, he successfully subjugated them, commanding them to honor their oaths. I sometimes think to myself, reflecting on those Dharma protectors, we humans make promises and vows before our gurus, yet we forget them after just a few years. But when these spirits and demons take an oath and make a commitment before the guru, they do not break it for hundreds of years. Sometimes when you think about it, humans are not even as reliable as spirits. We humans easily allow our vows to degenerate. After a while, we simply forget them. But as for those spirits, even though it's been ages since Guru Rinpoche came to the Tibetan region, even after such a long time, we can still remind these Dharma protectors. You must remember the promises you made in the presence of Guru Padmasambhava. But the spirits might turn around and ask you, what about the vows you made before your guru? Those spirits then offered their life essentials, mantras, and rituals to Guru Padmasambhava. For those spirits that were harder to subdue, Guru Rinpoche tamed them through various other means, such as fire offerings. This process was carried out twice. In the end, Guru Rinpoche declared, "From now on, the Buddhadharma can be practiced smoothly without hindrance, and monasteries can be built just as you have wished." Indeed, Guru Rinpoche's kindness is truly immense for the land of the Tibetan region. Because he subjugated so many spirits and demons back then, even to this day, our practice of the Dharma has been very smooth, and the same goes for building monasteries. I often think the Tibetan region has an incredible number of monasteries. Even in a small county, there are dozens of them. There are also quite a few in Yunnan, but smaller in scale. In the Tibetan region, whether it's in Dokam, Utsang, Kham, or Amdo, when it comes to building monasteries, the earth deities, mountain gods, and water spirits have all been very supportive. Otherwise, it would be very difficult to have so many monasteries. But of course, these earth spirits and Dharma protectors still need to keep up the hard work. I hope these monasteries in the Tibetan region won't face many adverse conditions in the future. I pray that those little retreat cabins will not be demolished, but will instead remain undisturbed and whole. Dharma protectors, remember what you promised before Guru Padmasambhava. Do not just hide away in some corner. He had already subjugated the spirits and nagas twice. He needed to do it once more. All right, we will stop here for today.
Bandara Padma Sodargye